Hi, boys and girls. Are you ready for another story? Our story today is a Christmas story. I know it's past, but it's not New Year's yet. The story is called The Kidnapped Dolly. Ooh. Well, Myrtle and Tom were at Grandpa and Grandma's house for Christmas. Tom was 8 years old, and he was Myrtle's cousin. And every year, all the cousins and all the uncles and aunts would gather up all their Christmas presents from under their Christmas trees, and they would converge on Grandma and Grandpa's house, and they would put all those presents underneath Grandpa and Grandma's tree. Well, for the months and months, and now more weeks, Tom had waited for Christmas to come. He couldn't wait for the Christmas presents. And Myrtle, every day for months, she had skipped down the sidewalk to Mrs. McConnor's variety store. Oh, variety stores are such wonderful places. I remember them when I was a little girl. We used to go to the Woolworth's variety store, and it was full of treasures for kids and everybody else. Well, she would go to that variety store. She would go look in the window, and in that window was a beautiful dolly. And Myrtle's heart fell in love with that dolly. And she would get as close as she could to it. She would smash her little nose against the glass so she could see that dolly better. And she would talk to that dolly. I want you to come home with me. You're going to be my baby. Well, that dolly had still been there right before Christmas. And every time when she would walk away, she thought that dolly looked sad, like she wanted to go home with Myrtle. Well, Myrtle thought surely that dolly was in the living room. And then Tom spoke up. He said, "Let's go in the living room and let's look and see. Maybe we can shake the packages and figure out what we get for Christmas." Well, there was a rule at Grandpa and Grandma's house that nobody at all went into the living room that was a child. And they all knew that rule because at Grandpa and Grandma's house, they never opened presents till after dinner. Tom said, "Why do we have to wait till after dinner?" And Myrtle said, "I don't know." Tom said, "Come on, let's go look." So they were going to go look, but they decided they better check and make sure that all the adults were accounted for. So they went outside to the workshop and they peeked through the window. Yes, there was Grandpa talking to all the uncles. They were all accounted for. Then they went back in the house, and they knew that all the other cousins were upstairs playing in the attic, which was a favorite place to play, and they were busy playing dress up. They would take all the old clothes that Grandma had up there in her trunks, and they would dress up to be other people. It was great fun. So they knew that they wouldn't see them. Then they went to the kitchen, and they saw Grandma. She had her big knife, and she was chopping up onions. Chop, 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 chop. And she was grinning at them. Well, then they saw two more of the aunts, and they were busy with their big spoons, stirring and stirring and stirring the gravy. Then they looked over at Aunt Margaret. Aunt Margaret saw them right away, and she frowned, and she picked up her spoon, She had been using this spoon to pick up the juice around the turkey and to pour it on. It's called basting the turkey, so the turkey stayed nice and moist. But now she was really frowning. She picked up that spoon and she said, "You kids, get out of here." And they did. When they went out, they could smell the smell of homemade baking bread, and they could smell that turkey baking, and they could smell stuffing, ooh, and 100 other delicious things. But they knew they weren't supposed to be in there, so they left. They figured everybody was accounted for. Nobody would see them. They went over to the living room door, and Tom, he grabbed that doorknob after looking. He turned it ever so carefully, and they both hoped that Grandpa had oiled the door. Tom pulled the door open, and it only made one little squeak. And they both rushed in, and Tom pulled the door over, and he turned that doorknob again. And if he pulled it real close to the door frame, and then carefully let the doorknob go back around, the little latch would go directly in the hole without making any noise. But when they got inside, the Christmas tree was lit, and it was beautiful. It was multicolors, and there was tinsel and balls, and oh, it was beautiful. And on top was the Christmas angel that was always there every year. And Tom said, "Look at all the presents." There were presents all over. The rug was totally covered with presents. There were so many of them. Well, Tom, he immediately got down and he started shaking. That one sounds like clothes, and he put it down, picked up a big one, and he went, oh, it had his name on it. And he thought, this must be an erector set. He set it down, and he kept doing that. She got down and she picked up a couple that had her name on it, and she picked them up and she started shaking. But then she could smell something. She thought, oh, this one smells like perfume. She set it down. She picked up another one. She sniffed at it. It smelled like chocolate. But she couldn't see any box that was big enough to hold a dolly, a big dolly. So she looked around the room, and then she saw there was something behind the couch. So she went over there. Whatever that something was covered by a quilt. She picked up the edges, and there was the most beautiful dolly. Let me show her to you. Oh, she was lovely. She had big dark curls, and she had big blue eyes that closed. And her dress, it had pink lace all over it, and she had on real shoes, and she had socks, and oh, she had lacy panties, and she had a pretty lacy slip. She was beautiful. Oh, Myrtle loved her. And then Tom came up and he said, "Put that down. That's not yours." She said, "It is too mine. It's my dolly. I asked for a dolly." And he said, "Look at the tag." And the tag said, "To Dorothy." To Dorothy. She's mine. And Tom said, "You know that Dorothy asked for a doll, too. You aren't the only one that likes dolls." And Myrtle, she held her tight, and she got up, and she ran out of that living room. And she went outside to the workshop and she looked around and she couldn't see anybody. She opened the door and she went inside and she took that Dolly and she lifted her up. She lifted her over a big pile of lumber that Grandpa had. Grandpa built furniture, and she set her on the other side of that lumber where nobody would see her. That was a whole pile of curls off of the wood when Grandpa had been planing them. And she set her down. She thought nobody would see her there. And Tom came in and he said, "You're a kidnapper and a thief." She hadn't thought about that. Kidnapper and a thief. And she looked at that Dolly, but it was hers. She was sure it was hers. But it said to Dorothy, somebody must have made a mistake. Then Tom turned around. He said, "I'm going in the house. But it's baby Jesus' birthday, and you've done this on it?" And he left. She hadn't thought about that. She didn't know what to do. She couldn't take the Dolly back because she heard Grandpa calling, "Dinner time! Come for dinner!" So she ran in the house and she thought, what am I going to do? Mom will be ashamed of me if she finds out. And Tom will probably tell on me. Dorothy will be mad at me. What am I going to do? Well, now that gorgeously delicious dinner, she wasn't the least bit hungry. She ate a tiny bit and just kind of moved her food around. When they got done eating, the aunts all started to gather up the dishes to put them in the kitchen to wash them. And then it was time to go into the living room to open those presents. Oh, what was she gonna do? And do you know what Grandpa had prayed before the food? Grandpa had said, "Dear Heavenly Father, we're so glad that all of us, all our children and grandchildren, could be here for Christmas, the day of your birth, dear Jesus. Thank you so much for all you've done for us." Oh, she could just have hung her head in shame. Why had she? It was bad enough to be a thief and a robber. Might as well have been a robber, a thief and a kidnapper. To do it all on baby Jesus' birthday. Oh. She went in and she sat down, and Grandpa had a way that he gave out the presents. He would read the name, and the person would come get the present from him. And then Grandpa would wait till they'd opened it and everybody oohed and awed over it. Then he would give out another present to somebody else. So it took quite a while to do their presents. He had gotten several presents. And Tom, he didn't look like he was worried about what was going on with. He was so busy opening presents. Oh, this was so hard. And then Mother, she got up and she went out of the room. And when she came back, she was pushing a doll buggy in front of her. And she brought it right over in front of Myrtle. And she said, "Look what got left for you." And inside was the most beautiful Dolly. And Myrtle, she recognized the material, the satin that the little tiny blanket over the Dolly was made out of. And she knew that Mommy had made it because it was made out of the scraps of the material that Mama had made Grandma a new bathrobe out of. And her clothes were beautiful. And as Myrtle looked at him, she knew her Mommy had made all those wonderful things, the little pillow and the sheet and a beautiful party dress. Oh, This was her dolly. But Dorothy's dolly was out in the workshop. What was she gonna do? She had to do something before people found out. Well, then, right after that, Grandpa said, "Okay, guys, we have lots more presents to do, but it's time to take a recess. And we're all going to go back to the dining room and have pumpkin pie with whipped cream on top." So everybody immediately got up and went to eat dessert. But Mary, she thought, this is my chance. And so while everybody was busy and didn't notice that Myrtle was gone, well, nobody noticed. And she went out to the workshop. There was nobody out there. She went in, she went behind that pile of lumber, and she picked up that dolly, and she started brushing off those little curls. And they were in the dolly's hair. And she tried to brush them off, and she straightened the dress, and she grabbed that dolly up, and as quietly as she could, she ran into that living room while everybody was in the dining room, and she went behind that couch, and she had to pass her own dolly as she went. And then, when she had picked up that dolly that was Dorothy's dolly, when she had got her and was going to put her back in the doll buggy, she saw the side of her face. Oh, there was something pink smeared on that dolly's face. Myrtle, she tried to rub it off. She pulled up her slip and she tried to rub on it, but it wouldn't come off. And she thought, oh no. Now, Grandpa, he painted landscape pictures, and she said, it must have been a little blob of paint that fell on those curls of wood. Oh, what am I going to do? And then she thought of baby Jesus. And she thought, I'm in big trouble. Oh, Jesus, would you help me make this right? And in her mind came a solution. And she immediately started taking the clothes off of both of those dollies. And she took her dolly and she put it over in Dorothy's carriage, and she started to dress her again with the clothes that had been on Dorothy's dolly to start with. And she dressed her all up and she put her carefully in the carriage. She covered it all back up. She quickly took the clothes that her mommy had made and she dressed up the dolly with all that stuff on her cheek. No, there was none on the other cheek, just on this one. And she smoothed it out as best she could. And she got her dolly all dressed up. And she noticed that the dollies looked a lot alike. And she put her dolly back down with that little cover over it that Mother had made. And when she went in the dining room, Mother looked at her and she said, been playing with your dolly, huh? And she sat down and she ate her pie. After everybody was done with their pie, they all went back in that living room. And all of a sudden, for Myrtle, it was Christmas, and she was happy. All that horrible feelings inside of having kidnapped somebody's dolly were gone. And she thoroughly enjoyed opening the rest of her presents. And at the very last, Grandpa had stood up and said, "I think there's one more present hiding behind the couch." And he went over and he pulled out Dorothy's doll buggy. And Dorothy, she was so excited. She immediately loved that dolly. She picked her up and she held her. And Myrtle had always thought that Dorothy was kind of stuck up, like her mommy was kind of grouchy. But she saw that her dolly and Dorothy's dolly, their faces actually looked almost the same. Myrtle said to Dorothy, "Our dollies look like twins. Would you like to have a tea party with me?" She hadn't even realized she was going to say that. And Dorothy went, "Oh, that sounds like fun. I'll bring some cookies." And Myrtle thought, she's not stuck up at all. Well, that evening when they all got home, Mommy was going to put Myrtle to bed. And Myrtle picked up her dolly and was holding her. And Mommy said, your dolly has, oh, she has something on her face." You know what, Mrs. Connors? She has lots of dollies, Myrtle, and we can take this dolly back and exchange her since she has something on her face. And Myrtle went, "No, Mommy, I love this dolly. I don't want to exchange her." She took her dolly to bed and she looked at her mommy and she said, "I'm going to name her Mary for baby Jesus' mommy." And Mama said, "That's a good idea." And when Myrtle was getting ready to go to sleep, she cuddled close to Mary and she thought, Jesus can help you when you do something bad. Turn it in to doing something right. Thank you, boys and girls, for listening. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.